You're very welcome to another episode of Counterpoint, where I talk to Alex Sheridan about a new TV series which goes out on a Saturday called Ireland Reports. Let's break it down. So, Alex, you don't have to convince me that there is a gap in the Irish media, and that's why Counterpoint is up and running. Do you see it the same way?
I absolutely do. For example, our first guest on our show, Senator Sharon Keogan, actually said to me when I invited her on to the first episode of Ireland Reports that this was the first web-based long-form piece of media that she had ever been invited onto. And that's somebody who has been a senator for many years in the Irish Oireachtas, who would be featured quite prominently in Irish media and the news, to not be invited onto content that is politically based or to be neglected when it came to newscasts or whatnot. We did see a gap, and that's where we said, okay, we'll start Ireland Reports and we'll start bringing on individuals involved in politics and current affairs who wouldn't get the same kind of platform as they usually would on the MSN or elsewhere in this country.
Yeah, typically, I'd imagine what you're kind of inferring there is that a lot of what, passes for current affairs programs is a kind of a sparring contest between the presenter or two different, political opponents having a go at one another in a very short period of time in one of the programs. Whereas your long form interview is different, isn't it?
Yeah, with the long form sort of interview, and this is where everyone's familiar with Joe Rogan and Tim Dillon and quite a lot of these podcasters. That long form content that's like the new late night television. Like Joe Rogan is the Johnny Carson of the world at the moment. So everyone knows that the 2024 presidential election might have been swung on Donald Trump going on to 3-hour podcasts and Kamala Harris refusing to go into anything that's longer than 20, 30 minutes. So long form, more sort of casual environment, topical based content, it just seems to be the way going forward. And then clips out of that go online. So if people were only looking for the headlines or the sound bites, it goes out anyway. But if you just wanted to sit in your car and listen to something, or listen to it on your commute into work, or sit down from your computer or TV for the evening and watch it as if you would a TV show, the long form content format, it's a lot more versatile than traditional media.
But do you think that it's more revealing as well? I mean, you're talking about Donald Trump, because I remember watching that program, and it had an effect on me. I must say, I just thought he was much more open and natural, over a long period of time, getting into piles of different things. And it was never really dragged, that particular interview. But of course, there are two strong people in it. But is there evidence to show that the long form is going in one direction and the kind of the old form is in decline?
I think absolutely. There's a lot of complaints with the Late Late Show that nobody seems to watch it anymore. The age demographic seems to be 60 years and over. And that will be the same in the US. So it's not just an Irish-based media. In the US, if you look at the age demographics, people aged between 18 and 45 would make up maybe about 5 to 10% of that viewership of late night comedy and late night hosts. You have the likes of Jimmy Kimmel, who I know it's jury's out on whether that was the FCC trying to get him off air, or maybe ABC Disney saw an opportunity to boot him off because he was too expensive and not bringing in the audience they used to. But you also have Stephen Colbert, who's having his show cancelled. I say it's less to do with censorship and pressure from the current administration, and more that nobody really watches these programs anymore. If you bring on people for a 10-minute segment or a 20-minute segment of an hour-long show, they can really prepare for that. There's probably a little bit of back and forth and negotiation on what you can ask them, where if you bring somebody into independent media to studio and speak to them for 3 hours like Joe Rogan did with Donald Trump, there's far less that they can prepare for that. They might be put more at ease. You might get a little bit more truth out of the conversation. And it's a lot more personable as well. I like to think as well that instead of being sat on a couch far away in front of a TV, a lot of these podcasts, people tend to listen to them. It's a little bit more personal. Tends to be a one-on-one. I think it's the evolution of the visual format.
So do you think then that the whole thing is blurring? I mean, before TV was about the sort of the the terrestrial signal going across and you pick it up on your antenna. Whereas now, we all have these mobile devices. It's instant. We've Wi-Fi and it's getting faster all the time. So, I mean, so this is the new TV, really, isn't it?
It is. I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And, how do you see that going, or how do you see that playing out? You were making a point there I thought was very interesting, that basically that Gen Z and, and the millennials are all down here doing their, digesting their current affairs in one way, and sort of the boomers are all up there and fading away. And you can see that in the circulation of the print media in Ireland. It's collapsed, 50 to 70% over the last 10 or 15 years.
I'd agree with that. And I'd say even the boomers are moving away from it as well. I know my own parents have their podcasts that they like to listen to. I very rarely see them even watching something like The Late Late Show. And some of the older colleagues I work with, senior managers who'd be in part of the boomer generation towards the younger side, it'd just be kind of long-form content, web-based content for them. They wouldn't really be TV watchers. I remember mentioning the name Matt Cooper to one of my managers recently, and he goes, "Oh, I think I know that name." Whereas if you said that to people, 15 years ago, who, if you watch any sort of media or kept up with the news, you know exactly who that is. But if you don't have a strong presence online, I know that Matt Cooper has his podcast with Ivan Yates over the past year, but certainly wouldn't be as recognizable to, something like the two Johnnies, or maybe even yourself with your podcast. There's a much bigger presence from the alternative media online than there is from legacy RTE news talk types.
Yeah, you must have been, or were you curious about the position that the Late Late Show host took, Keelty took with Jimmy Kimmel, and just saying, look, if you're having a problem with free speech, come over here. I found. Did you find that as ironic as I found it?
I found it a bit ironic. I guess maybe we can sort of pat ourselves on the back that we don't have draconian hate speech legislation, but we came very close to something like that happening. I'm not sure Keelty would have been as up to date on just how close we were to such terrible legislation that coming in, and laws which could see the Gardaí show up at your house and confiscate every device in the house if somebody who you lived with was suspected of having hateful content on their phones. Ireland came pretty close to being a sort of East German sort of situation when it came to freedom of speech. So to point over to the US and saying we have a much better situation over here, we don't, but it could have been a lot worse, and Keelty's might leaving a bit out by not mentioning that.
And just walk us back into that point, that the that whole free speech debate all centered around the hate speech laws, and there was quite a fuss about it, but it wasn't a political fuss. It was a public fuss about it, and the government backed off. Is that an unfair description?
I'd say that's a fair description. It's something which I don't think enough people appreciate had been in the works for a very long time. Going back as far as 2019, that's when Charlie Flanagan, then Justice Minister, started fielding the idea of bringing in hate speech legislation or updating Irish hate speech laws, because we do have our 1989 Incitement to Hatred Act on the books, which now we're finding Fianna Fáil and Jim O'Callaghan is speaking to Dáil and saying that he's communicating to the EU that we actually are in line with European directives on hate speech and whatnot. Whereas before, that's a Justice Minister colleague of Fianna Fáil was trying to do the opposite. But there was massive pushback in 2019. You had sort of fiascos like Charlie Flanagan appearing on the radio and claiming that he had been recently a victim of hate speech himself, and referring to an instance of the ploughing championship, when really it was just one of his constituents was asking him about hate speech laws in a little bit of a combative way. So a video emerged of that. You had some other situations.
The innocence of it, yeah.
You had some champions of bringing in hate speech laws they were rolling out. We had some young Irish athlete who was appearing with Charlie Flanagan talk about the need for hate speech laws. And then people went through his social media and they found like some pretty out there comments which would not have been allowed should these hate speech laws being brought in. But what Flanagan did is open a public consultation, and those consultations are meant to get a vibe of the public. There was massive backlash against it. It was something like 80% were negative. That was received over I say a part of a year, and then lockdown happens. They realized they took a little bit of a bloody nose about it, gets forgotten about for a few years, and that's in 2022, the end of 2022. They say that we're going to progress with bringing this in again. That was under Helen McEntee. Helen McEntee, and then briefly Simon Harris when she was on maternity leave, and then back to McEntee. And that's when the real fight happened.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, there was quite a pivotal conference, wasn't there, in the RDS around that time?
That's right. Yes, myself, part of Free Speech Ireland and Gript, we organised a conference in the RDS, which saw about 1,000 attendees.
So just tell us about Free Speech Ireland. When was that set up?
That was set up, if I'm correct, around 2018. So that was actually not set up by myself or the current people involved. It was set up by a few young students in University College Cork.
Good for them. So it was concurrent with the genesis then of the whole hate speech move towards hate speech.
Yes. If I'm correct, the UCC students, they noticed that certain young Fine Gael types were facing pushback within the organisation from, I guess, more left-wing inclined students. If they're conservative, more inclined, they were getting a bit of pushback. Sometimes their talks were not being allowed on campus, and that's where they set up the Facebook page and the Twitter page for Free Speech Ireland. Around 2022, I realized that page was dormant, so I reached out to those students who I knew from, back in the day, and I say, hey, will you let us take your branding? Will you let us take your name, your social media, and we'll try and make this an actual organization, and it's a legal entity these days with a tremendous amount of followers.
Well, I mean, isn't it just as well that all that happened the way it happened? And because if you look across at the situation in the United Kingdom, what do you see there?
Oh, you see nearly as many people getting arrested for online speech as in China, which is saying something. So we talk about these Western democracies being beacons of human rights and freedom of expression, but now you have comparatively high levels of arrest for online utterances as somewhere like Belarus or China. And I think by most recent statistics, there are more people arrested for online speech in the UK than there are in Russia. So,
actually, we have a slide just put up there, just to reiterate that point. So the United Kingdom is about the equivalent size as Germany in terms of population, and let's just look at the numbers there. It's running nearly 4 times the per head of population, 4 times the weight of Germany. But you're right. I mean, I didn't see the China. China is a tiny fraction of the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
and Russia like 400. If the data is absolutely accurate, of course, all these things.
Yeah, and then of course, I guess you have to caveat to saying these are arrests. They don't always necessarily result in convictions or custodial sentences.
But they don't have to. Isn't that the point? That
it's the chilling effect which they're looking for, yes.
Yeah. I think I ran across a number there recently which showed that only about 10 or 15% of arrests actually ever end up in prosecution. But what, of course, it does, it frightens the horses. I find that very interesting, because I interviewed Ben Habib recently on Counterpoint, the head of Advance UK, about all of this, and it's quite remarkable that of all the countries in the world, you have the biometric digital ID coming in with this kind of arresting people for what they're saying. It seems extraordinary that the United Kingdom, of all places, is where it's landed hardest first, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, with the United Kingdom, I guess it was one of these countries which self-styled itself as being a bastion of liberal values, part of the Enlightenment, didn't quite get into the revolutionary Enlightenment like, let's say, France, Ireland, or the US did. But definitely, I'd say 100, 200 years ago, you would have some thought leaders, Edmund Burke types, would be turning in their graves, so to speak.
At it, yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about any of the people that you've had on Ireland Report so far. Who I think you led out with Senator, was it?
We had Senator Sharon Keogan, who was a brilliant ally in the fight against the hate speech bill.
She was.
Senator Keogan was involved from early 2022, attending public meetings and trying to get word of this out and having to defend free speech. After that, we had Councillor Malachy Steenson, and we had on our third show, Councillor Linda de Courcy of Independent Ireland. Most recently, we had former Ambassador Ray Bassett, who is the former ambassador to Canada, Jamaica, and the Bahamas for Ireland. And our upcoming show is going to feature Callum Darragh from the YouTube channel Britannica and a former host of the Lotus Eaters podcast.
Wow. Well, that's quite a punchy lineup for a brand new TV series. But tell me about Independent Ireland and Linda de Courcy. She's a councillor, is she?
Yes, Linda is a councillor for South Dublin County Council.
Yeah.
I would say she'd be one of the more senior members in Independent Ireland. So you do sometimes see her appear on RTE as part of a panel of Independent Ireland.
Good for her.
And when she was on our cast, she was talking about a bill which Independent Ireland are looking to introduce to the Dáil to expand the nomination process to MEPs. So it's not just to Oireachtas members or councillors who are nominating presidential candidates. We did have Ray Bassett on, who said that he'd rather see that extended further. So to MPs sitting in the Northern Irish Assembly should also be able to contribute to that nomination process. And then there's other people of the opinion, like Malachy Steenson, you should just get rid of that nomination process altogether. It's not democratic. Malachy compared it to places like Mongolia and Turkey, which you'd never uphold as bastions of of democracy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well, that gets us into the presidential election. You've a background in activism in the free speech area. It's interesting the type of guests you've on so far because it's reflective of that. Especially starting off with Senator Sharon Keogan, who's been a champion of that inside in the Oireachtas when nobody else seemed to take. Well, with some exceptions, very few were taking any interest in what was going on, which I always find quite absolutely extraordinary. I just don't understand the place at all. Especially after June 2024 when they voluntarily joined the EU Migration Pact. But when you look at it now, the presidential election, and you see the bloc that went in, the political bloc that went in, how do you reconcile that bloc with at the same time the same government telling people you should go out and vote, and it's it's a secret ballot. But when it comes to the presidential process, there's a block put in, and it's not a secret ballot, even though it could have been under adjusting standing orders. How do you reconcile that?
I reconcile it in saying that I think there is a cultural divide between members of the Oireachtas and the people who work within the government buildings and senior civil service and the regular public. Sometimes I would brush shoulders with these people, whether it's through my employment or through casual relationships. Ireland being a small country, you do bump into people who work in the houses of government, and they tend to have a little bit of an attitude that we run the country and all the other people are a bit stupid. So if they can do stuff to restrict the vote behind the scenes and still look on the face of it as being like Democrats with a small d, they will do that. So it's not just with the presidential nomination that you had publicly Fine Gael say that we do not want our councillors voting for an alternative candidate. And there's rumours that Fianna Fáil did the same privately. I think recently there was an attempt to reform, we're going to do a similar thing to Limerick and Dublin where we have a directly elected mayor. And there's an objection to that. It hasn't moved forward. And you had some comments saying, oh, well, you could end up with Mayor Conor McGregor. In my point of view, I go, well, trust the people. If you even looked at opinion polls, Conor McGregor, I don't think he ever got higher than 5%. You would need much more than that to be elected mayor, be elected president. Let people vote would be my opinion on that, my take on that.
So how do you see it going then? I mean, as you know, there's a campaign. I'm involved in it, so just to put that out there. To encourage people, and Malachy Steenson actually launched it here on Counterpoint to spoil the vote if it ended up in the mess that it's in, because a huge number of the electorate, there's nobody in front of them, and they know there's nobody in front of them because they were blocked. So do you think the spoil the vote campaign is going to be a success or a failure or some kind of moderate success?
I think it's dependent on a couple of things. I will like to acknowledge that a recent poll, I believe, which was published by the Irish Times, does show that spoil the vote could be landing on about 6%, which could end up in about 90,000 spoiled ballots. The two things I'll say in to push back on that is in the European and local election in 2024, we had 100,000 spoiled ballots. Now, there's a lot more candidates. We ran 2 referenda at the same time. People can get confused and put an X down next to the candidate they like instead of number 1. It's going to be a lot easier this time. So it might be easier to discern which ones were spoiled deliberately and which ones were just improperly filled out. But that leads me on to my next point. We need observers in the counting centres, which is not going to be as accessible as on local or general elections, because if you're part of a candidate's campaign, you get a pass to visit the count centres, and every candidate gets a nominated officer to view spoiled ballots. If we were able to get people in there and observers to view spoiled ballots just when they just throw them out and get a tally of where they're going, unless we can prove that there is a significant amount of them were spoiled deliberately and had write-in candidates, it might be hard to sell that the spoiled ballots are a protest vote. So I think we need observers on site.
And is that? I'm sorry, you're well ahead of me there on that. I wasn't aware of that. So, is there not? Are there not observers on site for the count?
There'll be observers who will be employed as counters, but their job is not to count write-in candidates.
Okay.
Now, I did speak to Malachy Steenson on the latest podcast he's on with me. Councillor Linda Corsi said the same thing. They said that through their allies in the Oireachtas or as sitting councillors, they're going to do the best they can to get observers. So I'd say people maybe need to start reaching out to the Spoil the Vote campaign and volunteer to be such observers, just so we can sort of keep track of which ones are write-in candidates and which ones are just improperly filled out ballots. And
what do you think would be the effect on the government in the event of a substantial Spoil the Vote campaign? I mean, well above the kind of conventional numbers.
I think the current FFG government can be kind of predictable in how they respond to things like this. I think initially we're going to see, we need to educate people on how to vote and make out that it was all just one big mistake. There needs to be a demonstrable difference between, instead of going off the European elections, we'll go off the previous presidential election, which was like 18,000 votes. If you do get 90,000 votes out of that, I think it's quite difficult to make the case that, now we've trebled or quadrupled the amount of people who don't know how to fill out a ballot. And the last election we had, 7, 8 candidates? Now we only have 2. It'd be very hard for the government to make that case that it was done by mistake. I think that will be their initial response to begin with, though.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what their response is, one way or the other, because it's going to garner attention, not just in Ireland but internationally as well, especially if people are beginning to see there's the rumblings of significant discontent with this government.
Yes. We do see that within Fianna Fáil, with the Jim Gavin debacle, there might be a challenge to the leadership, possibly from Jim O'Callaghan against Micheál Martin. However, you do have the European presidency coming up, and Micheál Martin delivered on that for his party, so he might survive it. But Simon Harris isn't too popular in Fine Gael anymore either. It might take for maybe the independent coalition, which is making up the numbers to make up the majority in government, to sort of back away, or maybe some Fianna Fáilers to break ranks. Then we might see a general election. But unless we get those people in the Oireachtas pulling away and understanding what the temperature is like in the country, it might be a few years before we see any meaningful change. What I hope happens out of this is maybe Independent Ireland's bill gets backed by constituents who go, look, we have a huge spoil of the vote numbers. We need support in the Oireachtas, just like we did against the hate speech bill. We need to call our local representatives and say, support Independent Ireland's bill, or maybe petition Independent Ireland to make that bill even more expansive, to extend, as Ray Bassett said, the nomination rights to individuals in the North or lawmakers in the North as well.
So in the round then, Ireland reports, you're going to be fishing among the political pool in Ireland. You're going to try and attract the major political leaders and speakers and so on, and get them into long-form discussions, which they won't be used to doing. And I think if they come on the show, they'll quickly find this is fantastic, because I can actually tease out things. I'm not being interrupted. You're not an interrupter. I try not to be an interrupter either. Trying to discomfort somebody and expose them in some way. I find that kind of obnoxious style of interviewing abhorrent. So, what do you say to those that are there now at the moment, that they think that it's all about waddling into RT and having, getting on a panel and getting a few seconds here and a few seconds there. What do you say to them? I mean, if you were if you were there in Buzzwells and they were just gathered and you were talking to them, what would you say to them about Ireland Reports?
I'd say if you would like to tease out some issues, as you said, if you want a non-combative environment, if you want to talk maybe the nuances of the ideology, why you got into politics, come off as a little bit more personable, come on to Ireland Reports. And it's not just for politicians, for the political pool. It could also be for maybe individuals who worked for the civil service or worked in something like the Gardaí or the Defence Forces and want I say, casual, safe environment to give voice to maybe concerns that they have with state institutions. Come on to Ireland Reports. It's an easygoing and violent environment. We are not interrupters. We are not trying to be investigative journalists, and we're not trying to make a show or make the WWE out of this.
And will you be looking at the sort of the macroeconomic side of it as well on the show? Because it's all interconnected with politics.
We'll try to. If we ever go into,
because you're in financial services, right? You're in risk management.
I work in risk management within a large banking institution. That's correct, and that's been most of my career.
No, but my point is that therefore you have the financial training to get into the whole macroeconomic stuff and do the.
I suppose so, but I, with something like that, I think I would want to bring on an economist as well.
Okay.
So there's no limits to the kind of guests that we can have on. When you're to talk about the macroeconomics, I probably would bring on another expert to bounce off and then tell me when I'm wrong.
Right. Okay. And then going forward, then how do you go? How do you intend to make your play, make your pitch towards the political establishment in Ireland to get them to come on? Are you just going to rely on the network effect, the growing effect of the program, or are you going to canvass?
We'll do a little bit of both. I definitely have a little bit of experience from my activist days when we were when I was involved in Free Speech Ireland. Sometimes you do just call the secretary's number of an associate or a Oireachtas member and ask, would you like to be at this public meeting? Do you want to give a statement to this? Do you want to appear on camera? You could do it that way. But sometimes, like if you do have a member of a party or a political grouping appear in a show and it looks like they came off well, they had a good time. Ireland's a small place. That does get around, and sometimes you get recommended. We've already had some associates of political party members we've had on who've reached out and go, hey, that was great. Could we come on next month?
Yeah, well, listen, just for viewers, just to let you know, Ireland Reports comes also from the same studio that Counterpoint is in, but you can see it. We've a different focus. I wish you well with it. I think it's a wonderful idea to get out there amongst the elbowing your way through all the political correspondence and giving a kind of a platform to politicians that they don't have at the moment. So I wish you well with that. And of course canvassing them. Of course, you won't see me canvassing the politicians too much. I'll be more or less barking at them to come on to the show. So we've a different approach to that. Different type of show. But I wish you well with it. I think it's a great idea. I think it's badly needed. I don't watch it anymore. I'm absolutely sick and tired of the old school political type interviewing that you see on television. It's you know what it is? I've described it like this in RT. It's a pissing contest between people. That's what it ends up. And you at the end of the night, you're scratching your head because you've learned nothing. So I wish you well with it, and maybe we'll have you back again on Counterpoint in a number of months, and we'll see how we got on.
Hopefully so. Thank you very much for having me on, Eddie.
You're very welcome.